Too bad. You have to listen to me. Okay, we're going to talk about the endocrine system. Endocrine system influences metabolic activities by means of hormones, which are transported in the blood. Hormones go to all parts of the body, but only affect parts that house receptors for those hormones. We've talked about the pineal gland before, releases melatonin when it's dark, so you'll get sleepy. We'll spend a bit of time talking about the hypothalamus and pituitary gland today. Thyroid, thymus, adrenal glands, pancreas, and the reproductive organs, the ovary and the testes, all produce hormones. Now, hormones, long-distance signals that travel in the blood or lymph, not to be confused with autocrines or paracrines. These are just local chemical messengers, and we won't discuss them in this course. Chemistry of hormones, amino acid-based hormones include amines, thyroxine, peptides, and proteins. Steroid-based hormones, and as you recall, steroid is a shape of chemical. It's an organic, specific organic shape. The hormones are synthesized from cholesterol. Examples: gonadal hormones, such as testosterone, adrenocortical hormones. Now, ways that are mechanisms of hormone action, ways that they act on target cells by altering plasma membrane permeability. They may stimulate synthesis of proteins, activate or deactivate enzymes, cause a cell to secrete something, stimulate mitosis. Target cells must have specific receptors. Hormones are only bind with the receptors for those hormones. For example, adrenocorticotropic hormone has receptors only on the adrenal cortex. However, thyroxine receptors are found almost everywhere in the body. Hormones in the blood are degraded by either degrading enzymes, they may be removed by the kidneys or the liver. The half-life of a hormone is the time required for a hormone's blood level to decrease by half. Interaction of hormones, multiple hormones can act on the same cells at the same time. Permissiveness, one hormone cannot work without the other one being present. Synergism, one hormone produces the same effect on target cells, so you get a bigger effect. Antagonism, they oppose the action of each other. For example, insulin and glucagon. Insulin lowers blood sugar, glucagon raises blood sugar. Now we have to control the levels of hormones, and they're based on a negative feedback system, with the exception of when you're in labor and oxytocin. We'll get there when we get there. Humoral, neural, or hormone. Now, humoral, the word humors comes from the ancient Greeks, and they talked about the body humors. They had 4 humors, bodily fluids they thought made you feel happy, sad, whatever. And so anything in the bloodstream, bodily fluids basically, blood levels, we refer to as humoral. Example of this, calcium level in the blood. When the calcium level decreases, the parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone causes calcium concentrations to rise by breaking down bone, as well as by increasing absorption and such. And once the stimulus is removed, as in calcium is normalized, then you just stop producing parathyroid hormone. Neural stimuli, actual nerve fibers stimulate hormone release. One example, sympathetic nervous system fibers stimulate the adrenal medulla and cause them to secrete catecholamines such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, this is an example of hormonal stimulus here. Everyone knows immediately when they look at this picture, this is a pituitary gland. Hypothalamus anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus releasing hormones that cause the anterior pituitary to release hormones that affect the thyroid, adrenal cortex, gonads, etc. Now, the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus are intimately related and work together. And the pituitary has two major lobes. It's also, pituitary is referred to as the hypophysis, not not th. That's wrong. It's hypophysis. So the posterior pituitary is actual nerve fibers, and it is referred to as the neurohypophysis. The anterior pituitary is glandular tissue, and it is referred to as adenohypophysis. Now, pituitary hypothalamic relationships, we're going to start with the posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis. It is actually considered to be a downgrowth of hypothalamic neural tissue. Oxytocin and anti-diuretic hormone are produced in the hypothalamus, but they're transported and stored in the posterior pituitary. So you get the production, and then you get stimuli up here in the hypothalamus. For either of these hormones you need, they'll be released into the blood vessels. And when these hypothalamic neurons fire, so posterior pituitary is simply a storage and release facility for oxytocin and anti-diuretic hormone. Okay, the anterior pituitary, as you recall, the adenohypophysis, makes releasing and inhibiting hormones. So, I think I said that wrong. Now, it responds to releasing and inhibiting hormones. I think I said that wrong for sure. Okay, I'm not going to start the recording over though, sorry. Okay, the hypothalamus, when it receives this stimulus, will release releasing hormones, whatever kind of releasing hormone, or perhaps an inhibiting hormone. But it releases say a releasing hormone for thyroid releasing hormone. It's going to cause the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which then causes the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone. Okay, we have anterior pituitary hormones, a growth hormone. Let's try that again. Growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, also known as thyrotropin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. Growth hormone causes you to grow. Shocking. Targets bone and skeletal muscle. Growth hormone is regulated by the release of growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Now, growth hormone inhibiting hormone is also called somatostatin. Stasis is stopping, soma is body. So the word somatostatin means stop growth or inhibiting growth hormone release. Okay, now if one has hypersecretion of growth hormone, in children you get gigantism. In adults, acromegaly. Hyposecretion is, in children, you get pituitary dwarfism. Okay, this guy is a giant. He has gigantism. If you notice, his shoulders, they're not broad enough for his height. He's probably not a healthy person. Many people who are pituitary giants actually don't live long, healthy lives because their hearts don't keep up with the rest of their needs. And they're not terribly athletic. I mean, this guy's got to be over 8 feet tall, and he's just not healthy. Okay, adult onset of growth hormone excess causes acromegaly. Look at these enlargements here. His ears are funny. His jaw is funny. His nose is funny. Things are growing, but he can't get taller. His bones can get much broader, and some athletes actually inject themselves with growth hormone. It's extremely unhealthy as well as cheating. And it makes you also look ugly. Okay, this is a pituitary dwarf here, and dwarf, the term dwarf is politically correct, but pituitary little personism doesn't really ring true. Now, this is the reason, one of the main reasons we need to take children for well baby checks. If they go and they're measured and they're not growing properly, they can be given injections of growth hormone and achieve normal height. And it's gonna, being that small can limit certain careers such as truck driving, construction. Living a normal 5th grade life and not being bullied would be another one. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone or thyrotropin. It's released by the anterior pituitary and stimulates normal development and secretory activity of the thyroid gland. Regulation of thyroid stimulating hormone, it's thyroid releasing hormone from the hypothalamus causes the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. So the hypothalamus releases thyroid releasing hormone, which causes the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which causes a thyroid gland to release the thyroid hormones, which act on target cells to make you do the things you do. Both the thyroid hormones and the thyroid stimulating hormone will inhibit the hypothalamus from releasing thyroid releasing hormone, and the thyroid hormones also directly decrease the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. So you have a very specific negative feedback. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, also known as adrenocorticotropin, is released from the anterior pituitary, stimulates the adrenal cortex to release corticosteroids. Regulation of adrenocorticotropin released, we have corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus is released in a daily rhythm, generally in the morning. External factors such as fever, hypoglycemia, and stress can alter the release of corticotropin releasing hormone, therefore causing more adrenocorticotropic hormone release, therefore causing cortisol to be released, which can raise your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and make you fat. Gonadotropins, also from the anterior pituitary. Now, these are named for the female because they didn't know the males made these hormones when the research was originally done, and then they figured it out later. So eggs develop in a follicle, so the gamete growth and production is caused by follicle stimulating hormone. Release of gonadal hormones is called luteinizing hormone because in the female, luteinizing hormone causes a surge of estrogen, which then causes the follicle to rupture, or you get ovulation, and then ovulation results in the formation of a structure called the corpus luteum that releases that produces hormones of pregnancy and maintains that pregnancy until such time that the placenta can take over. Now, regulation of gonadotropin hormone released, we have a gonadotropin releasing hormone during and after puberty. It's suppressed by gonadal hormones. So this explains a little bit about how birth control pills work. Birth control pills keep you from developing a new follicle because these gonadal hormones, estrogen and progesterone, prevent the release of this hormone, so you quit cycling. You quit producing new follicles. And you don't, if you don't produce a follicle, you don't release an egg and you don't get pregnant. Prolactin is released from the anterior pituitary and stimulates milk production. The posterior pituitary, again, axons of hypothalamic neurons, so from the hypothalamus, it simply stores anti-diuretic hormone and oxytocin, and these are going to be released in response to nerve impulses. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions, and this is actually a positive feedback loop. The more contractions you have, the more oxytocin you release, which makes you have more contractions. If this were not so, the human race would not exist, because women would have 2 contractions and they'd say, I'm done, we're not going to contract anymore. So it's an involuntary positive feedback until you have childbirth. It also triggers milk letdown, and also plays a role possibly in sexual arousal and orgasm. This is a foal that is nursing on its mother. So as it suckles on the mother, it's going to cause milk letdown. Now, in humans, initially you have the suckling causes the reflex oxytocin release and therefore milk letdown. And then an example of a learned reflex, we hear our baby crying and we have milk letdown. And then you could be shopping in Walmart with no thought of the baby whatsoever and hear someone else's baby cry and suddenly have milk letdown. Another thing that oxytocin is thought to do is cause this lovey-dovey feeling that one has when one hugs a child, hugs someone they cares, or has sex. It's a bonding thing, bonding with the baby, because when they get a little older and they flush your phone down the toilet, you won't kill the little turd. And, just gives you more affection and love for them. And also bonding. Humans are designed to be monogamous because in the original hunter-gatherer people that we were, and some people still are just in hunter-gatherer environments, a single mother just ain't going to make it when she's got 2 babies, both which have to be carried, because you can't carry 2 babies and pull back a bow and arrow and collect your own meat. You have to have a pair. And so male-female pair bond is so that the male can hold the baby or shoot the deer or whatever you're trying to eat, because it really takes more than one person to raise a baby. Now, it's hard for anyone, mom or dad, to be a single parent even now, but in historic life or in primitive lifestyles, it's even more difficult, and it greatly decreases the chance of success. So that oxytocin from just following one's instincts and being close to one's partner is a pair bonding thing. Okay, anti-diuretic hormone, and I couldn't have said better myself than one of our students said, anti-P hormone, keeps you from urinating as much. It's made in the hypothalamus, and osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus respond to changes in solute concentration of the blood. If the solute concentration is too high, that means you're dehydrated. So anti-diuretic hormone is synthesized, released, and it inhibits urine formation so that you don't get more dehydrated. You retain those fluids and you can restore your hydration level. If the solute concentration is low, anti-diuretic hormone is not released, and so therefore you regulate your normalized amount of blood solutes and hydration. Now, alcohol inhibits anti-diuretic hormone. I put this picture here because basically when one drinks large quantities of alcohol, I think there's an old saying, pee like a racehorse. Well, this is a good memory device for that here. Alcohol inhibits anti-diuretic hormone in that cotton mouth feeling whenever in the name of science drank alcohol, they know that they woke up with a dry mouth, splitting headache, aching all over, and a lot of those are the results of dehydration. Okay, anti-diuretic hormone insufficiency is diabetes insipidus. Now, we think of diabetes referring to diabetes mellitus, which is a glucose issue. So when you have high blood glucose, I know my granny used to say he's got sugar diabetes, and I thought that sounded so dumb, but in reality, it's really a pretty good term because you also have diabetes insipidus. They're producing a large amount of urine and intense thirst because they have anti-diuretic hormone insufficiency. Hypersecretion of anti-diuretic hormone is going to cause severe water retention, and it's generally after surgery, neurosurgery, or trauma, or cancer, syndrome of inappropriate anti-diuretic hormone secretion. That's probably going to be a pituitary tumor. Now, the thyroid gland, you have two lateral lobes, and then they're connected by anterior medial mass called the isthmus, and it produces thyroglobulin. Colloid is thyroglobulin plus iodine, and it fills the lumens of the lumen of the follicles, and then thyroid hormone is produced from that. Parafollicular cells produce the hormone calcitonin. Okay, this is anterior because you can see your epiglottis here and the thyroid cartilage here. So this is your isthmus, and these are your lobes of the thyroid gland. You can see they're just where the trachea starts, just slightly below, and then to the right and left. Here's your follicles here. And you have follicle cells that produce the actual thyroid hormone, and then you have parafollicular cells outside those that produce calcitonin. Thyroid hormone is actually two related compounds, T4, thyroxine, and it has two tyrosine molecules and 4 bound iodine atoms. Therefore, we call it T4. And triiodothyronine, which has 2 tyrosines and 3 bound iodine atoms. Thyroid hormone's major metabolic hormone, increases metabolic rate, heat production, burning calories. It plays a role in maintenance of blood pressure, regulation of tissue growth, development of the skeletal system, as well as the nervous system, reproductive capabilities. Almost everything is necessary to have thyroid hormone for. Synthesized, thyroglobulin is synthesized and discharged into the follicle lumen. Iodine ions is what an iodide is, are taken into the cell, and then they turn to iodine, I2, and released into the lumen. Iodine attaches to tyrosine, and there are peroxidase enzymes that mediate this. Now, iodinated tyrosines link together to T3 and T4. Colloid is endocytosed, so taken in and combined with the lysosome, and T3 and T4 are cleaved off of the original source and diffuse into the bloodstream. That's your thyroid hormones. And they are transported by thyroxine binding globulins or proteins. Both T3 and T4 bind to target receptors, but T3 is much more active than T4, 10 times more active. But peripheral tissues convert T4 to T3, so it all works out well. Negative feedback, rising thyroid levels inhibit thyroid stimulating hormone. And we got a picture here. Okay, first you have hypothalamus causes thyroid releasing hormone to cause anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which is a thyroid hormone. Once it gets up to an adequate level, the thyroid hormone inhibits both the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus from producing their products. Homeostatic imbalances of thyroid hormone, hyposecretion in adults is called myxedema. If it is due to lack of iodine, that's endemic goiter, and we'll go through these with pictures. Hyposecretion in infants causes cretinism. Hypersecretion causes Graves' disease. So this is an example of cretinism, and it's hard to tell by the picture, but these kids are not going to grow. They're probably a lot older than they look to look pretty malnourished. They're going to have mental and physical developmental disabilities. There's is a genetic link in cats to this, so there no doubt is in humans. All it would take for these children to have grown up normal was to have had baby wellness checks and get thyroid hormone pills, and they would have been absolutely fine. Now, I decided that hypothyroid cats are a little cuter than hypothyroid humans, and this cat, as you notice, is morbidly obese. If one listened to its heart rate, we would find that its heart rate would be low. Its temperature might be slow. It might have depression if cats get such. Humans with hypothyroidism tend to be depressed, low body temperature, very overweight, even if they don't eat much. So this is a reason why in the case of depression, one should always do a complete physical exam, including complete blood work, because there can be physical causes for depression, such as hypothyroidism. Okay, this is swollen thyroid gland. This child is no doubt hypothyroid. This is an endemic goiter. That is because he did not get iodine in his food, because no doubt he didn't have iodine available. Looking at him, he probably didn't have much food available. So this child is going to have mental handicaps, depression, low blood temperature, low heart rate, yet he's thin. That's because no matter how low your thyroid hormone is, you have to have enough food to eat. Now, this should probably have been on a different page, but if you notice, this individual's eyes are bugging out a bit. And this is because of edema behind the eyes, and this is in hyperthyroidism. This is an individual with hyperthyroidism. I always say this looks like my second grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson. The only way I know to make her look like it is to give her a beautiful red mustache. Otherwise, she could not be. Mrs. Hendricks was her name. She was quite mean. I need to draw a paddle here because that was her favorite thing, where she beat on kids. Paddle. Eadle. You can't read my writing. Okay. Anyway, in hyperthyroidism, you have rapid heart rate, weight loss, edema behind the eyes, and you may have an enlarged thyroid hormone. You may or may not. Now, actually, hyperthyroidism can lead to nervousness. It can cause psychosis. It can cause death. It's not something to be taken lightly. It's often caused by Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune disease. And I should have mentioned hypothyroidism in adults is often caused by Hashimoto's, which is also an autoimmune disease. Okay, calcitonin, again, part of the thyroid gland, produced by parafollicular cells in the thyroid. It's antagonistic to parathyroid hormone. It inhibits osteoclast activity and release of calcium from the bone matrix, stimulates calcium uptake, incorporate into the bone matrix. Not essential in humans. You don't have to have your thyroid gland to keep your calcium regulated. Thyroid glands to keep your calcium level regulated. So your parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone, and these are very important in calcium homeostasis. It just shows 2, 1, 2, but you could have up to 4 in this person, 2, 3, 4 on each side, and then on this side. So if the thyroid gland is accidentally removed, if they accidentally remove the parathyroids, all of them, when removing the thyroid gland, probably going to kill your patient. Okay, what parathyroid does is increases blood calcium, stimulates osteoclasts to digest bone, enhances resorption of calcium, as well as secretion of phosphate, promotes activation of vitamin D, increases absorption of calcium in the intestinal mucosa. I should have said resorption by the kidneys here. And there's a negative feedback. Once the calcium level is high enough, the blood inhibits parathyroid hormone release. This is absolutely essential to life because if your calcium level gets too, if your blood calcium level gets too low, it's going to kill you. Hyperparathyroidism is generally going to be due to a tumor. It could be due to a parathyroid tumor. I guess that's what it would be due to. Softens bones and deforms them. You get elevated calcium, depression of the nervous system, kidney stones. Now, hypoparathyroidism is due to gland trauma or gland removal. So you're going to have a very low calcium, and extremely, extremely low calcium makes you die. Now, in human species, it causes tetany, a spastic paralysis, respiratory paralysis, and death. Now, if you caught this human in this state and you gave them intravenous calcium, then it would reverse the problem. Not if you wait till they're dead, but in this tetanic state, you could reverse it. Have to give it slowly because extremely, extremely high calcium levels make you dead now. There's dead now things and dead later things. Extreme imbalance of pretty much any of your electrolytes, but especially calcium, make you dead. Very dead. Okay, the adrenal glands, also known as suprarenal glands. They're pyramid-shaped on top of the kidneys, and they're 2 glands for the price of 1, sort of like your pituitary. The adrenal medulla is nervous tissue. It's basically an extension of the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal cortex, with 3 layers of okay, slide, let's move forward. Oops, we got 2. There we go. Okay, the zona glomerulosa releases mineralocorticoids. Zona fasciculata produces glucocorticoids. Zona reticularis produces sex hormones, gonadotropins. Okay, and here we have our medulla down here and our cortex on the outside. So let's see. Yeah, here we got our adrenal medulla, and this is our cortex. So zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. Okay, mineralocorticoids, extremely important. Regulate primarily sodium and potassium as well as water. Aldosterone is the most important, most potent mineralocorticoid. Stimulates sodium resorption and water retention. And it's important that you keep enough water back so that your blood pressure doesn't bottom out. Because if blood pressure bottoms out completely, then you end up dead. That's dead, see? There. Okay. Now, mechanisms of aldosterone secretion. This gets a little bit complicated here. Okay, the renin-angiotensin mechanism. Decreased blood pressure. You're starting off with low blood pressure. Stimulates the kidney to release renin, which triggers the formation of angiotensin 2. Basically, it causes angiotensin 1 to be converted to angiotensin 2, and it uses the angiotensin converting enzyme. And we'll talk about those more in blood pressure control. But it stimulates aldosterone release. And so we had low blood pressure. This aldosterone is going to make us retain fluids and sodium, and then we'll be okay. Okay, plasma concentration of potassium. If you have increased potassium, you release aldosterone, and that causes you to get rid of potassium, increase sodium and water retention to balance things out. And you know, if your potassium is too high, you die now. Same thing if it's too low. Adrenocorticotropic hormone does increase aldosterone during stress. Now, atrial natriuretic peptide is actually made by the heart. It blocks the renin and aldosterone secretion. So atrial natriuretic peptide will actually decrease the blood pressure. Again, I'll just draw you a little heart here so you can remember it's released by the heart. And it's just picks up on high blood pressure. It's released. It makes you pee more so you don't have as high blood pressure. Aldosterone is, I didn't say it right, aldosteronism, hypersecretion of aldosterone, is due to an adrenal tumor. Adrenal tumors are just really fun. Think of everything the adrenal gland does, and we'll talk about the tumors in a minute. Hypertension and edema, because you retain sodium, you retain fluids, you excrete too much potassium, which is going to mess up with your fire of neurons and skeletal muscle. Hyposecretion is Addison's disease. Again, a very fun one, because Addison's disease, more times than not, is iatrogenic. An iatrogenic disease is one that we give the patient. Iatrogenic. We give the patient as healthcare providers. I don't know how to make it bigger. It's not going to do it. But if you put the patient on, say, prednisone for a long period of time, and then they stop taking this prednisone, it's a corticosteroid, P-R-E-N-I-S-O-N-E. If they quit taking the prednisone, suddenly they have gotten used to not making their own aldosterone as well as their cortisol. And so when you quit giving it to them, suddenly they just don't produce the aldosterone, because prednisone acts as cortisol and aldosterone. And you suddenly get a really, really severe drop in blood pressure because you lose all your water. So the hypertension and edema are suddenly reversed because you release water and you release sodium, and the blood pressure drops. And I've seen these patients, the history is they oh, we quit giving them the prednisone 3 days ago, and they come in, they're unconscious, barely alive, blood pressure unreadable. You put them on saline, give them an IV injection of a corticosteroid, either Solu-Delta-Cortef or dexamethasone, and they'll bounce around in no time. And then you've got to put them back on their prednisone and spend months and months weaning them off of them. Short-term use of prednisone is not going to cause that. It's long-term use, more than 3 months. Okay, cortisol, glucocorticoids. They keep blood sugar levels relatively constant, maintain blood pressure by increasing action of vasoconstrictors. So cortisol keeps your blood sugar nice and high and your blood pressure nice and high. Cortisol, again, most significant, released in direct response to adrenocorticotropic hormone, eating, activity, stress. This is your stress hormone, of course, with epinephrine as well. But with stress, you're going to release lots of cortisol. Primary effect, gluconeogenesis. Look at this word. Gluco, you're making more glucose. Neo, out of something new. Genesis, making stuff. So forming glucose from fats and proteins. So you get a rise in blood glucose and fatty acids and amino acids. Homeostatic imbalance of glucocorticoids. Hypersecretion is Cushing's syndrome. Cartilage and bone formation is going to be depressed, so you end up getting osteoporosis in these patients. Inhibits inflammation, inhibits the immune system. So these are immunosuppressant drugs. Cardiovascular, neural, and gastrointestinal function. Generally, if you have high levels of cortisol, it can make one nervous, have a heart rate, high blood pressure, immunosuppression. Now, this is often iatrogenic. We're often doing this. We're giving prednisone. Now, if your patient is dying because they have severe autoimmune disease that they can't live with, like Crohn's disease, trying to think of another horrible one, you may have to put them on prednisone, and you may have to keep them on it for life. And it's going to cause all this Cushing syndrome. I'll come back to this slide in a minute. This is the before the prednisone or before Cushing syndrome onset. This is after. See the buffalo hump, see the fat, see the high blood pressure. You don't see it, but you would if you measured it. Hyposecretion is Addison's disease, and you don't just get decreased cortisol, you get decreased mineralocorticoids. So sodium level, dehydration, weight loss, decreased blood glucose, hypotension, and if severe and rapid, death. And it's often iatrogenic. So that word means, as you cannot possibly forget, you did it to them. So you've had this patient on prednisone, you fail to wean off of it, and this is what you get. Patient comes in, comatose, blood pressure so low you can't read it, and you just have to replace and then wean them off. Okay, sex hormones, androgens, male sex hormones. They may contribute to the onset of puberty, appearance of secondary sex characteristics, and sex drive. Now, it's thought that in the male, just a nice adrenal gland is not going to cause a good sex drive. You're going to have the testes to actually produce testosterone to cause enough of a level of testosterone to make the sexuality work properly. But females that have had total hysterectomy have enough androgens that they actually do have a normal sex drive. And it's thought that, or they may have a normal sex drive, it's thought that androgens from the adrenal cortex are most likely a major factor in the female sex drive. Okay, the adrenal medulla, epinephrine and norepinephrine. These cause blood glucose levels to rise, blood vessels to constrict, the heartbeat to go faster, blood to be diverted to the brain, heart, and skeletal muscle. These are your panic attack hormones, fight or flight stuff. Also, bronchial dilation. Epinephrine stimulates all the blood flow stuff and bronchial dilation, but norepinephrine causes vasoconstriction, peripheral vasoconstriction, which causes increased blood pressure. And here we have a couple of things. Okay, in short-term stress, like you're being attacked by a bear, you're going to get the initial sympathetic response, which comes straight off of the spinal cord, and it's going to go straight down here, the adrenal gland, all the way down here. Okay, now you're going to get increased heart rate, increased glucose. The liver converts glycogen to glucose, so that's another reason for blood glucose to increase. Dilation of bronchioles, changes in blood flow to allow you to run from the bear. Your digestive and urinary systems are not going to pay much attention to what's going on. Increase in metabolic activity. And all that's good because you get away from the bear. Long-term stress is other things. Retention of sodium, increased blood volume and blood pressure. Proteins and fats converted to glucose. So you're actually going to waste protein. Fat maybe would be good, but increased blood glucose, suppression of the immune system. So long-term stress is very, very bad. It can kill you. Okay, the pineal gland, small gland hanging from the roof of the third ventricle, secretes melatonin, which is derived from serotonin, interestingly enough, and it regulates day and night cycles. When it gets dark, you're not seeing a lot of light, you release melatonin and you fall asleep, which is the only possible reason anyone ever falls asleep in a class. It can't be that it's boring. It has to be that the room is too dark. Okay, the pancreas, triangular gland behind the stomach, has both exocrine and endocrine glands, endocrine cells. Acinar or exocrine glands produce enzyme-rich juice for digestion. Without this exocrine function of the pancreas, you're not digesting food unless you replace those enzymes. You're just going to starve to death, full belly. Now, islet cells, islets of Langerhans, contain endocrine cells. Alpha cells produce glucagon, which raises your blood sugar. Beta cells produce insulin, which lower your blood sugar. Well, here we have glucose, glucagon. The major target to increase your blood glucose of glucagon is the liver, where you get glycogenolysis, breakdown of glycogen to glucose, and gluconeogenesis, synthesis of glucose from non-carbs, including proteins, and you increase blood sugar here. Insulin lowers blood glucose by transporting glucose into fat and muscle cells and body cells in general. And you have negative feedback loops. Normal blood glucose, 90 to 100, more or less. If it starts to drop, the pancreas is going to release glucagon, liver is going to break down glycogen, and you're going to bring it back up to normal. If the blood sugar increases, insulin is going to be released, and normal body cells are going to take up, tissue cells are going to take up glucose, and the liver is going to take up glucose and convert it into glycogen so that the blood sugar is then normalized. Diabetes mellitus is homeostatic imbalance of insulin. We have two types. Type 1 is hyposecretion, most likely an autoimmune disease that messes up the insulin-producing cells, or hypoactivity of insulin. Basically, we have destroyed our insulin receptors by eating too many potato chips, pizza, ice cream, sodas, Coca-Colas, anything that's good will destroy and overload those type 2 cells. So when you get older, then you tend to have diabetes. Cardinal signs of diabetes mellitus: polyuria, because the glucose is going to osmotically, it's going to spill over into the kidneys, into the urine. The kidney cannot dispose of all the glucose once it gets past, about 200 milligrams, 200, a blood glucose number of about 200. It's just going to be impossible for the kidneys to get rid of all that. So it's going to spill over into the urine and take water with it. So you pee a lot. You're thirsty for two reasons. That's polyphagia. One is you pee too much. That's part of why you're thirsty. The other reason is because you got all this glucose creating a sludge blood stuff because you got particles of sugar all in your bloodstream, and so therefore it's going to cause that problem. So you pee too much, too thirsty. Polyphagia, you eat too much because you're starving to death because your cells don't get any sugar because it's all in your bloodstream. Okay, insulinism, excess insulin secretion results in hypoglycemia, disorientation, and unconsciousness. It could be from a tumor. That's a possible thing. Most of the times when you see severe hypoglycemia, you have either a starvation case or a diabetic that took their insulin or had an insulin pump and did not eat. And they will become severely disoriented. And this is, you always got to remember not to take personally what your patients say to you. Sunday school teachers will cuss you out. Businessmen will strip naked and run down the highway. They don't even know what they're doing. And when they get back to normal, they don't even know it ever happened. And not even telling them. Okay, ovaries and placenta produce sex hormones. Ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and these a maturation of the female reproductive organs, secondary sexual characteristics, breast development, and then the cyclical changes in the uterine mucosa. And then the placenta itself secretes estrogens, progesterones, and human chorionic gonadotropin. Testes produce testosterone that initiate maturation of male reproductive organs, secondary sexual characteristics. It's necessary for sperm production and maintains the reproductive organs in their functional state. And in the embryo and fetus, they actually cause the initial development of the reproductive organs. A young man is born with a penis and testicles. Well, he would have had testicles. If he did not produce testosterone, then his testicles would never let down. He would have no penis. He would appear externally like a female, whereas actually he was a male. So you have a high level of testosterone in a fetus because it's necessary for the development of the reproductive organs. And it also masculinizes the brain. Even though it's politically correct to say so, males are different than females. It doesn't, I'm not saying I care who you like to hang out with as far as, a life partner. I'm saying that they're just different. And if they weren't different, then we'd all be the same. They're different. Males are different than females. Physically, mentally, there's just little differences. Okay, the heart produces atrial natriuretic peptide. If the blood pressure is too high, it reduces the blood pressure by making you urinate more and losing sodium through that urine. Other hormone-producing structures, the kidneys. If you have low oxygen levels in the kidney, release erythropoietin, which causes red blood cells to be produced. Renin initiates the whole renin-angiotensin mechanism. The skin causes production of cholecalciferol and up with your vitamin D that's usable. Adipose tissue, leptin, is involved in appetite control and stimulates increased energy expenditure. I personally have not noticed that the more adipose tissue I have, the more weight I lose. I think there's a problem with that definition. Okay, the thymus. It's the purpose of it is for development of T lymphocytes, which are the very basis, the foundation of the immune system. But it produces hormones that cause those T cells to develop. Without the T cells, there is no immune system. So it's the basis of the immune system. That's enough on hormones. Thank you.